For the purposes of the recording, can you spell your name and offer your title?
Yeah, so Ryne, Ryne Hillenberg, Hillenberg. I am the Senior Associate Athletic Director for Compliance and Student Athlete Development.
Terrific. And we're talking today a little bit more about sports and compliance. So we'll start with the sports side of that. What sports did you play, or maybe do you still play?
Yeah, so I was a big Indiana basketball fan growing up, Hoosier in North Central Indiana. Large part to my uncle who worked at IU for a better part of 40 years. He was actually on Bob Knight's staff for a little bit on the sports information side of things. So I grew up being courtside for a lot of IU basketball games. So I love basketball. I played that until I was about a freshman in high school. Um, Dabbled a little bit in that. And then as I went through my high school career, realized I was more of an individual sport guy. So I shifted to tennis and golf and found some success with that.
Tennis, singles or doubles?
Um, Probably more doubles.
Doubles.
Yeah.
And then do you have a memorable moment from when you were an athlete as a kid, maybe in high school?
Yeah. So probably, my freshman year of high school, I started out as the manager for the basketball team. And the funny part about it was we were in the beginning of the season and we were kind of just messing around doing a drill in the beginning of the practice segment there. And I was making more baskets than a lot of my teammates, a lot of the guys on the actual team. So the coach had me move from the manager position onto the actual squad. So not necessarily like a moment in a game necessarily, but it was fun to shift from that manager role over to play on the team.
What about the other direction? Any devastating moments that you recall?
Right. Yeah. So kind of along the same lines as that was kind of my peak and my downfall in basketball because I wasn't focusing as much as I should have in like the conditioning and the things like that. So while I could shoot really well, I didn't have the conditioning to play in the full games. So that was kind of the end of my road as a basketball athlete. And then I shifted my focus over to tennis and found some success in that in golf. So yeah.
And you've been the Senior Associate Athletic Director for Compliance and Student Athlete Development since July 2020, as I saw on your LinkedIn profile. But your ties to compliance-based positions goes back to PFW in '09 when you were a graduate student. So what sent you in that direction?
Yeah. So what I did kind of in my college time here at Ball State, I was in media relations and I thought that was the route that I wanted to go. Um, it wasn't until grad school and I was doing that, what felt like kind of a job, right? In grad school, I was a GA for Purdue Fort Wayne. And I realized at the time that I wanted something different. I wanted something that was maybe more broad reaching. So in sports information, I was over like two programs, and I wanted to help the entire department as much as I could. So I wanted to kind of step out of the day-to-day sports information and into something else. There was an opening in compliance that I was able to slide into, and it worked really well. So I spent a year in media relations and a year in compliance as my master's degree was wrapping up.
How would you describe what compliance is in 60 seconds?
Yeah. So with compliance, we're given kind of a bad rap as like the police of the department. So I would say we're more of a resource in that we educate student athletes and coaches. We monitor a lot of what's going on, whether that's initial eligibility, financial aid, extra benefits, kind of keeping a pulse on what's going on in the department. And then if we do happen to have an issue, that's where we can go to the NCA and say, hey, we goofed on these couple things. But the NCA actually likes to see that. They like to see that we have monitoring practices in place so that we can catch things to show that we're doing our job correctly. So violations aren't altogether a bad thing, but that's kind of the smallest part of the job. If we're doing everything else really well, we can report those violations in the enforcement side of things.
You mentioned monitoring practices. So what are some examples of those monitoring practices that you have in place?
Yeah, so what we'll do, we'll go to practice occasionally, make sure that we don't have people outside of our coaching staff that are engaged in coaching activities. We make sure that all of our athletes are staying eligible academically, so we have to monitor their coursework, that the classes are degree applicable. We keep an eye on their GPA, make sure they have the right GPA to maintain eligibility. Um, we make sure that they don't have too many contests in a season. They're not going over hours in a given day or week of practice activities. So there is a lot that's there. Now that we're kind of like in mid-season form in the middle of the fall, a lot of things are moving pretty smoothly. We've done a lot of the educating. We kind of set the teams up for success. Now they're kind of just doing their thing, going through their year, right? They're through their season, so they know that, hey, I can't practice more than 3 hours a day, for example, or all games count as 3 hours, so they're able to kind of lay out the schedule and then adhere to those timelines.
When you're talking about educating, excuse me, what do you notice among the athletes that's commonly misunderstood or just unknown about compliance related issues?
I think so. There's probably a lot of misunderstandings from them, like sports wagering might comes to mind. Like depending on where they're coming from around the country, or maybe a junior college, for example, may not have the same rules that we have at the NCAA level. So we have to say, hey, you might have been able to do X at your previous institution, but here you have to follow these rules over here. So sometimes it's a little bit of a steering them in the right direction, correcting some things that maybe they were used to doing elsewhere. Um, but I think for the large part, they come in with a pretty blank slate, and they know like, hey, I've got to follow these rules if I want to be a participant here.
What makes Ball State unique compared to previous administrative roles that you've had at other universities like A&M and Kentucky?
So having been a Ball State student, I knew that I wanted to come back and serve in a professional role. Um, in large part due to the feeling that I had here as a student. Like I was able to kind of do more than I was able to get my hands on a lot of different activities here. So, like as a student, I wrote for the school paper. I was a manager for the volleyball team. I worked in the media relations department. So, having said that, like as a professional, I can come here and work and really make a big impact on the lives of the student athletes. Um, so really the atmosphere here at Ball State is more of a family atmosphere. It's more of a all hands in kind of approach, whereas at a Texas A&M and Kentucky, it's maybe more of a corporate feel. You kind of are maybe more siloed in your work that you're doing. Um, so you have your area of expertise, but you're kind of kept in that lane, if you will.
And I know earlier, I even made a note, you wanted to make a big impact, with some of the athletes. So I was curious about a rewarding situation you've had as an athletics administrator, a situation where you felt like you truly made a difference.
So as part of the student development piece, I oversee SAC, so the Student Athlete Advisory Committee. Been doing that. I think this is my third or fourth year overseeing that group, and it's comprised of the leaders of every team. So there's about 30 to 40 student athletes on that group, and the really rewarding things that they've been able to do, and that I've been able to help lead them to, is raise food, like so collect food for the monthly mission or for Second Harvest Food Bank. Um, you know, we try to empower them to be more than just a student athlete, be more than their sport, because we know they're going to go and they're going to graduate and they're going to go out into the workforce and be more than just their identity as an athlete. So those are really cool. And then kind of along those lines, that group, well, the student athlete body as a whole did over 4,000 hours of community service last year. Um, and when you look at the local economic impact of that, it's over $140,000, which is tremendous. And we really like to encourage them to do that. And that's not something we force them to do. A lot of those teams and athletes, they have a heart for that and they go out in the community and do it, whether we're asking them to or not. So it's pretty neat.
Wow, 4,000 hours that equates to 140K. Would that be comparable in your experience to what other universities do with athletes, in terms of community service and the economic productivity?
I would say probably pretty close. You might have some that do less, some that do more. I think kind of going back to the family atmosphere here, we have a lot of teams and athletes I think that are they're driven to go in and do that service aspect. Whereas maybe at bigger institutions, maybe they're focusing more on becoming a professional in their sport. So maybe they focus more in their sport and, and perfecting their craft in that.
And I know that there are a lot of present day challenges when it comes to compliance. You've got transfer portal, you got NIL, Score Act, is out there. You're kind of curious to see what happens with that. So, and those are just three examples off the top of my head. But what right now would you identify as a concern that occupies a lot of your time in your position?
So yeah, to your point, there's a lot of moving parts, and that's kind of what keeps me up at night is the fluidity to it all. It is such a moving target. So I mean, our athletic director Jeff and I were kind of joking this week that um, the football transfer portal hasn't remained the same since it was put in place. Every year they've changed it, so it's hard for kind of athletes to keep an eye on what they're supposed to be doing and when they go in the portal. It can be challenging for administrators to say, well, it was this last year, but it's not that this year. So your friends might have gone in at that point a year ago, but now they can't. You can't go in either yet. So I think it's just kind of trying to maintain sanity amidst all the moving pieces. Uh, but yeah, there are a lot of challenges. You mentioned NIL. Yeah, there's new language and guidelines coming out about that. It seems like weekly, as different lawsuits come through, uh, different elements of guidance come out of the House settlement. It completely overhauled a lot of the NCAA rules in the manual.
How do you manage in your role that fluidity? That was, I like that word. You mentioned that earlier. The fluidity of this. I mean, you probably have other people who respond to you. Of course, there's coaches and then players. So there's kind of like this almost like tree, And so how do you stay on top of all of these moving parts?
We have a great group of coaches, and I think that really helps to create some stability for our athletes in particular. And one thing that I try to do for them is to take all the information, all the chaos, if you will, and kind of boil it down and make it as simple as possible for them to digest and understand. So while there's a lot of external things going on, just try to take all the information that we're getting from like the Mid American Conference, from the NCAA, and boil it down and say, hey, here's something you need to be aware of. This is something new for us. Keep an eye on XYZ. And it does my mind, it keeps them it keeps them informed and then able to arm their athletes as needed. So we don't inundate them with information because they want to know, like, their coaches' schedules are very busy. They're focused on winning, training their teams. So we give them the information they need to be successful without overdoing it, like without just pelting them with all the updates, right? Like boil it down, bullet points, as simple as possible, so they can absorb it, understand, and move on with their roles.
Yeah, do you find that it's easier for there to be violations and mistakes made? And is there some latitude granted knowing that these things are constantly evolving?
So what we try to do, kind of along those lines, we educate our incoming coaches probably more than the returning, because the returners we have a confidence that they kind of know how we do things here and how they're supposed to be behaving, if you want to call it that, or functioning. So our new coaches, we try to give them a little extra guidance and time as they're getting onboarded. So accidents do happen. I mean, even us as the compliance staff, we make mistakes. Um, one thing that comes to mind, we had a student that signed with us over the summer, and we didn't get him in the NCAA system before he committed to us. We're supposed to be tracking him in the eligibility center before before we sign him to a scholarship and then announce his commitment. We hadn't done that, but that was one out of 172. So we were 171 out of 172 that we did correctly, which is like 98, 99%. So yeah, you take all the good, you're doing a lot of good work, and
And
accidents do happen.
well, and this is a number that you may not have immediately off the top of your head, but if you had to estimate how many student athletes does Ball State have? If you took the men's teams, the women's teams,
About 445.
okay,
Yeah.
445. I got you. So, because that's a lot of people to have to educate and inform and update. So, yeah, I was kind of curious because then, those moving parts, transfer portal, NIL, score. That what I read recently is that redshirt policy. There's another legal. I don't know if it's a lawsuit necessarily, but there's someone challenging the idea of the 5 year,
Yeah.
policy.
Yeah.
And so I'm just thinking like if you have an athlete who's coming from Texas or Alabama, they may have their own implementation or interpretation of those policies. And then they, come here, for various reasons. I could see how that gets really confusing. And so is it really like kind of just like you said with the coaches, getting them informed and then you kind of rely on them to pass that information to the
Yeah,
players?
large part. And then you saw a lot of confusion coming out of the COVID era
Mhm.
because, for example, there were a number of athletes we were getting from junior college programs and teams where the National Junior College Athletic Association had a different stance on a COVID year than did the NCAA. So they might have come in thinking, hey, I have 2 years of eligibility remaining, when the NCAA only considered one of those to be valid. So a lot of it was, bringing them in saying, hey, I'm sorry to tell you this, but at this level, we only honor one of those two opportunities. So you have 1 year remaining uh, this upcoming year, for example.
So yeah, there's just gotta be a lot of understanding. Yeah, I got you. When you're talking, the players and the coaches, athletics in general as a family, what are current needs that you commonly notice among present day student athletes?
Yeah, so what we try to do is we have a kind of a three-prong approach, I would say, to student athlete well-being and success. So we want to give them all the tools they need to be successful academically. So looking across the street here, we have the North Quad, and inside that is the student athlete support services team. So that's a group of about 6 or 7 staff members that build them up academically. They provide tutorial services, learning specialists as needed. So academics is obviously paramount because if they're not eligible, then they can't compete in their sport. Two is kind of the championship performance. So that's the strength and conditioning and the athletic training, making sure they're staying healthy and they're training, at a championship level to perform in their sport. And then thirdly is that life skills stuff. So how do we encourage them and empower them to be good humans, and whether it's the community service stuff, we focus on mental health, mental well-being. We have a lot of resources through our sports psych lab and those folks to help do some exercises and training with the teams to make sure that they're right mentally so that they can perform their best.
I'm kind of curious too, then, how you see the future of college sports and what your role or what you hope your role might be in that future.
Yeah, it's that's a great question because it's one of those things where as the last, gosh, 5 years or so have evolved, uh, it's really with NIL and the portal, it's kind of exploded, right? It's kind of blown up from the thing that we used to know, especially when I got in the field in about 2010 is when I started professionally. So it is much different. So where I see it going is kind of just this where it is today, in that we need to be adaptable. We need to make sure that we're adapting to the current demands of the athletes. Because without student athletes, we wouldn't have this enterprise. So we need to make sure that they're satisfied and they're as they're training up, and whether they go pro or whether they go pro in something other than sports. I think their experience is paramount. But also, I think there's been some questions on do we take the Power Four and kind of make them their own entity, and then let the Group of Five stay that traditional college athletics model, you know? So I think when the NIL concept was initially floated out there, it wasn't intended to be what it became with the revenue sharing piece. Just my opinion. So the initial NIL was, hey, can I use my name and my picture to have my own business? Can I be self-employed or an entrepreneur? And it became maybe the top 1 to 5% of an athletics department athletes getting paid, which I'm not against them getting paid, but that wasn't, I think, the original goal of NIL. And now you see a lot of schools at our level kind of struggling because they were already maxed out budget wise before we had to try and find a way to provide additional benefits to athletes. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I mean, as I'm reading into some of these wheels in motion that we've been talking about, because there's like, 4 or 5 big ones, it's not just one, it's like 4 or 5, right? So what I'm reading too is that, and it's interesting to me too, I don't know that you may know why it's this number, but a program, an athletic program that banks more than 20 million, if I remember reading it right, $20 million, they're obligated then to provide those athletes, with almost like a benefits package, health services. I think, oh, I'm trying to remember now what I've read it that, but like health, not just as an athlete at the school, but like 3 years. I think it's up to 3 years after they're no longer there. So it's almost like a benefits package as if they're an employee, but they're trying to like draw the line there or figure out where that line is.
Yeah.
Are they employees of the institution
Right.
or are they still student athletes?
Right.
So I mean, that's what's the question here. For me, it's more, do you I mean, you've been around sports, you've been a sports admin for how many years? So there's you know, a longevity there of experience. Do you notice any red flags where it's like, ooh, this could become a problem?
I think the movement towards having athletes become employees, I think you hit the nail on the head there. I think that's problematic. And in the SCORE Act, from what I understand of it, it's trying to make sure that the athletes do not become employees. Because I think that what we would see is a lot of them, I would say 95% of the athletes wouldn't actually like the reality of that because they wouldn't get free sports medicine. They wouldn't get free gear or transportation. They would have to provide taxes on all of those. So while they might think that it would be really cool to be an employee, I think the large majority of them would really struggle to when they get a chunk of that. Maybe they get a lot of money. Maybe they get $100,000, but they have to pay their own tuition and room and board, and then they have to pay their own taxes and their own benefits. And before you know it, they have less in pocket than they did before. I think for the majority of them. So I think that's probably the red flag that I think is staring at us.
Yeah, it's a very evolving situation. As I'm reading, I'm like, I'm kind of curious why 20 million. Like, if they looked at the Alabamas and the Texas and, figure out, okay, like there's X number of schools above this, there's X number of schools below it. I have no idea. It's just interesting to me that that was like the threshold, at least for now, today.
Yeah, it'll go up as inflation and the system evolves. I think that number will rise.
So, how would you describe your administrative philosophy if you had to tweet it? What is it now? 280 characters or something like that?
Yeah, right.
What is that?
Yeah. I would probably say something along the lines of we are uh, building building champions. So building champions in life and in sport. Um, keeping our student athletes experience at the center of everything we do. Probably be my quote there.
That's great. You started, from what I could tell, your career as an on-air personality for WCRD. I saw that. And what else? Communications intern for the Indianapolis Indians. So, okay, you got a room full of aspiring sports media professionals and content creators. So, what advice, what tips do you have for them?
Yeah. I think 3 to 4 things come to mind. Have fun would be just make sure you're having fun in what you do. So that's what led me to try to work in sports because I knew it was going to be fun for me to continue to go down that path. 2, build relationships. It's not the what you know always. That's important, but it's a lot of it is who you know in the field and who can connect you to the jobs you want to get. So speaking of the Indians, I wasn't, that job was not on my radar at all. But because of someone that I knew, they reached out to me and said, "Hey, I've got an opening. I need somebody. Are you interested?" And I said, "Heck yeah." At the time, I didn't have anything lined up for that particular summer. So I was able to step in and work in that role, and it went really well. Um, let's see. Be curious, I think, is one. So I'm a Ted Lasso fan. Some of you may be Ted Lasso fans in here. Be curious, ask why. I think we oftentimes get stuck in, well, we've always done it this way, so we're just going to keep doing it this way. But that might not be the best answer. So ask why, because I think it lends to improving the situation and the outcome. And then I think lastly, be numb to geography. So me personally, when I was in Indiana, I was a Hoosier. I never envisioned myself leaving Indiana, but when I was leaving grad school, I applied for what felt like 50 jobs. I got 2 calls, Texas and Texas A&M. And I'm like, okay, ready or not, here we go. So I moved to Texas for a entry-level $30,000 a year job. And that started my career. So I think just be numb to geography, because you never know where that first job is going to come from, but it will open up doors for you later. So
That's great. That gets us right in that window of where I said I would stop my Q&A. So here's what we'll do. Because I do want you to weigh in kind of like I do with Jeff about, pros and cons of, the art of interviewing, stuff like that, especially from, your side as the interviewee, not necessarily the interviewer. So we'll get to that. Give you about, I don't know, 10 minutes or so if needed. Maybe we don't need 10 minutes, but now's your chance. If there were things I didn't ask, or maybe something you didn't catch or you didn't understand, here's your opportunity to ask that, to kind of flush out your notes. So who wants it? Yeah, Brandon?
So with the college sports landscape changing so much, like how different is it working with NCAA now before like the NIL revenue sharing and everything?
I think the NCAA is more, they're more understanding, I think, in some cases of what student athletes are going through, what the demands are. I think, maybe going back 5 to 7 years, I think that they were trying to be more strict on different policies. But, now that we've shifted, and in some cases athletes are making hundreds of thousands of dollars and, in their additional financial benefits, I think that it's more forgiving of an experience for athletes. If something does happen, you've seen some of these rules that they're trying to enforce. The penalties are lesser than they used to be.
Good. Cabry?
Just with like the mental health aspect, how have you seen that change your athletes, or have you seen more of like a peak in mental health problems? Yeah, just touch on that.
So our athletes, I mean, as probably many of you, like your lives are very full. Our athletes have 20 hours of mandated work if they're in season, but that doesn't account for the prehab, the rehab, the travel, the classwork, their social life. So their bucket of time in a week is very full and overflowing. So I think we've seen that pressure on them to be successful, to thrive in all areas of their life. So sometimes, like, they're human just like the rest of us, and they need a break. So they need some, whether that's a one-on-one with a sports psych person, or just some free time to just be themselves and not be that athlete identity or that student identity. They just need to unplug like the rest of us. So we try to give them resources and enable them an opportunity to do that. So like this week, for example, is the Mid-American Conference Mental Health Awareness Week. So we've done a number of different activities within this week to try and encourage those.
Just like, sorry, a follow-up question to that. Is the mental health, do you think it's different on different levels of conference, or does it all look the same?
Great question. I've only worked at Division I. I would venture to say there's a higher level of pressure at this level because of the like athletic scholarship, for example, and feeling like the athlete has to keep that scholarship. Maybe their family can't afford to send them to college. I know mine couldn't. So whereas if you're not getting that initially, maybe you're at a Division III level where it is maybe more of a club feel. So not that they don't want to do well, but they don't have the pressure of maintaining that scholarship, perhaps.
You mentioned earlier that NIL, you don't believe NIL was intended to be a revenue stream. So I wanted to ask, what did you think it was going to be, or what do you want it to be?
Yeah, so I think the original in its infancy, it was like, can I host my own camps? Can I have my own business? Some of those elements that had been prohibited for a long time under the NCAA. And what it has become is some institutions able to just, it's like a payroll. Like their athletes are just making money just because, and I'm not saying that they don't deserve that, because they do go out on the field or court and they work their butts off every day. And the institution makes a lot of money, right? It's just there, it's the age-old argument of is the $70,000 a year scholarship enough? You know, I think for 95, 99% of the student body, student athlete group, I think it was. I think they were satisfied, but I think you saw the elite athletes that had that marketability and the ability to make more, that kind of shook up the system.
I saw that you worked at Texas A&M, Kentucky, Indiana, and Ball State. What have you seen different between like the SEC, Big Ten, and MAC, and just like the NIL, just like that's all?
Yeah, great question. The bigger schools, I would say when we started this NIL landscape, the collectives that were these third parties, that I think they helped the bigger institutions at the Big Ten and SEC schools kind of craft and initiate these third party deals. So you saw some schools had partnerships with like car dealerships. You saw, what was it, Utah had there was a BYU, maybe, I forget, but they had like everyone on their football team had a new vehicle, like a new truck. Like that's not something that you would see a MAC program do, because there's not that same level of marketability. Here at this level, it is much more of the athlete. It's athlete driven. What are you interested in? What do you want to do? We've had a number of athletes have success with it. But then on the other side of the spectrum, many just want to be an athlete. They just want to be an athlete and a student and just leave it at that. So.
And then, sorry. You're good. And the side question is, how did you get from like, if you first started with Texas A&M, how did you get from there all the way to like, what finally came out to this job for like at Ball State? Even though I know you were a Ball State grad, like how did all of that get out of like 30 seconds?
Sure. Early in my career, one, it was the experience here. I knew I wanted to come back and kind of be that admin that helped other students have a similar experience that I had. But it was my chance to be a head coach, right, of my program. So I had always been an assistant director or assistant compliance person at those other stops. So I wanted to be a head coach, and this was my chance to be the head coach of the compliance program. It's probably the easiest way I can say that.
So you kind of touched on earlier about how with the difference between NIL for bigger schools like Power 4 and Group of 5, and it's almost getting to the point where like Power 4 schools now are almost professional because of how much money they're able to give their athletes with how much money they're making versus Group of 5 programs. Do you think that's kind of something we're heading towards, where Power 4 is kind of becoming their own entity, where like you're only going to make a certain amount of money there, and you're kind of looked down upon, and not looked down upon, but do you think we're getting closer to that, kind of like them being their own entity?
I think you do see that, yes. And the House settlement that we saw come into being this summer, I think is trying to put some guardrails on that so that it doesn't become full-fledged professional. So there are still some elements like you still have to go to class and maintain academic eligibility. They're putting a cap on the amount that an institution can give. So there are some parameters there, but yeah, to your point, if it's not, if it isn't monitored. I think it will become that, and I think that it'll be a much different system and environment here in maybe 3 to 5 years.
Follow up to that, do you think if that ends up happening, do you think there's any good that could come out of that for the smaller schools in the group of five?
I think if they had the stability to know that, like the group of five, it did maybe revert back to that former model, I think that would it would create some stability instead of schools at this level trying to be something they're not. I think that you see a lot of institutions trying to keep up with the Joneses, if you will, and like trying to spend the money, but they don't necessarily have it. So I think it's forced schools to get creative. I don't know that it's sustainable to try and spend that money with a lot of states, education budget cuts. It's hard. It's hard to try to maintain that level of providing benefits.
Last one.
Oh, probably not. Probably not actually, because there's so many opportunities via social media that obviously weren't there before. And like for example, we had a softball student athlete who she wasn't the most like elite athlete. She wasn't the best of all time, but because she had some crazy number of TikTok followers, she was recognized by these brands that she had a large or a high opportunity for marketability, and that she would be able to share their product. So that was the number, or the reason that she was contacted was because of her potential reach. So she made, for example, I want to say about $15,000 on an NIL deal just because she had such a large TikTok following. It's a great question.